each other enough that if the person beside you falls asleep, I want you to reach over and grab that fatty part of their arm, and I want you to pinch it until they wake up, okay? You're going to do them a favor. Everybody practice right now. Reach over and grab it. No, don't do it. Don't do it. All right, you're going to leave going, I left with bruises. It's the only youth rally where I got beat up. Thanks. It is a blessing to be with you today. I bring my family, my wife Erin, and we've got 4 beautiful children and one that we don't talk about. I'm teasing. We only have 4, okay? Some of you are like, I can't believe you just said that. And we only have 4 children, okay? We've got 3 boys and then 1 rose amongst the thorns. Her name is Michaela. I joke with people, but it's pretty true. She's a beautiful girl, but she can start dating when she's about 30. And there's not been a man born yet, save for Jesus, that's worth her. So I hate it for the guy who thinks he's going to walk into my house and ask for her hand in marriage. That's not going to go well. Not going to go well. We do have fun doing what we do. And I enjoy studying the Bible together. And so I want you all to join with me this morning in a study of a series of lessons that I've called Raise the Bar. And right off the bat, I'm going to ask you to open your Bibles up. Everybody has a Bible, right? Or one of those electronic things that everybody says is a Bible, and they look over and see what games you're playing. No, I'm teasing. Nobody plays games here in the service. I want you to look over to 1 Samuel chapter 17. That's where we will begin this morning in the first of the 3 lessons. And you're going to be familiar with this particular account because it's of David and Goliath. How many of y'all have ever heard of David and Goliath before? Everybody knows about David and Goliath, right? Well, this morning I don't want to just, recount David and Goliath to you, but I want you to see some of the details that are in this account because you've got to understand something. The Old Testament, you're going to learn something today outside of Raise the Bar, okay? The Old Testament can be divided into 3 groups. 3 groups. You ready for this? The first group is of 17 books. The middle grouping is of 5 books. And the last grouping is of 17 books. Now, when you look at those 17, 5, and 17, what you're going to find out is that the first group of 17 and the last group of 17 can be divided into a group of 5 and a group of 12. Let's look at the last group of 17 of the Old Testament. Those are called the minor prophets, are actually the major and the minor prophets. And you have 5 major prophets and 12 minor prophets. Right? So the last group of 17 can be divided into 5 and 12. Now the first group of 17 can also be divided into 5 and 12. The first 5 books of the Bible are known as the Law, and the next 12 books of the Bible are known as the history books. You say, Joe, why are you telling me that? I mean, I could go to a youth rally and that's really what you're going to teach me? Well, here's why I want to teach that, because when you look at where 1 Samuel lies, it lies in the history books of the Old Testament. It's important for you to know that because when we read about David and Goliath, it's not like there was a TV reporter out on the battlefield with them. He was sitting there interviewing them. Okay, we see here there is a giant. This giant from Gath is coming onto the field and he is mocking them, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, he is mocking. That's not the way it was. When you look and consider the history books, you've got to understand that somebody is telling the account of David and Goliath. It's already happened. They already know how it turned out, and they're looking back on the event. Now, if you could look back on an event, you already know how it turned out. You might say some things, report a few things that were significant to the outcome. So when we look at 1 Samuel chapter 17, understanding it's a history concept, why would they bring out the details that they bring out? That's the question. And so when we start 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 1, we read this. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Soka, which belongs to Judah, and they camped between Soka and Azekah in Ephes-Dammim. Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and camped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array to encounter the Philistines. Now, you would say, well, why are they putting out there where all these people were? Because they want the recipient of this particular history account to be able to picture in their mind where they are. I mean, around here, that would make sense too. You know your structural markers, your land markers. If you don't, you're not from here like we aren't. You may know a few things around here, right? About all we know is Savannah and the Best Western Hotel, right? And so if I were to recount this, I would probably say, okay, one army was encamped here, and the other army was encamped here, just so you can get that in your mind. But you see, you would also know the lay of the land. You would know how far apart they were. Could they hear each other? So that's why that's in there, right? So look at verse 3. The Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, while Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. Then a champion came out from the armies of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath. And here's where it gets interesting. Remember I told you this is in the history books. So why bring out the details that are brought out? That's a great question. Why report that Goliath, his height was 6 cubits and a span? I mean, what benefit is that to this account? Verse 5. He had a bronze helmet on his head. What benefit is that to the history of this event? He was clothed with scale armor, which weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze. I mean, out of all the things you could record, why record how much his scale armor weighed? He also had a bronze greaves on his legs and a bronze javelin slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the head of his spear weighed 600 shekels of iron. His shield carrier also walked before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel and said to them, verse 8, "Why do you come out to draw up in battle array? Am I not the Philistine, and you servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he's able to fight with me and kill me, then we will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall become our servants and serve us." Again, the Philistine said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." And then verse 11 is where I really want you kind of to focus in on. It's not just verse 11, but I want you to also pay attention to verse 24. Because when you start looking at why all this detail about Goliath, I mean, after all, whoever wrote that was preparing us for VBS, right? I mean, that's what he was doing. He was writing this, and God inspired, said, you know, one day, the Lord's church is going to have Vacation Bible School. And they're going to study Goliath. And so we need to make it where they can put a life-size picture of Goliath on the wall and throw flour sacks at him. You think that's why all that was recorded? Shake your head like this. So the question is, why was it recorded? If it wasn't for a future VBS, and then you look over and you see verse 11 and you see verse 24, and you see the response of the children of Israel. When the Bible says, verse 11, when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Verse 24 says this, when all the men of Israel saw the man, they fled from him and were greatly afraid. Now, I want to stop there for a moment because I want to ask you some questions. You think about why all the detail of Goliath. Why recount it in the history? And the only answer that I can come to is because all of what was said about Goliath plays into the way the Israelites respond to Goliath. In other words, he was overbearing. He was overpowering. He was the baddest man on the field. But here's what's interesting. The children of Israel had their own champions. This idea of you send out your champion and we'll send out our champion and there will be a battle. There's no indication that Goliath was introducing a new concept. I mean, he wouldn't have done that. That wouldn't have been the time, hey, I've got this great idea. If you guys send out somebody and we send out somebody, then let's see what happens. We know that David had what was called mighty men, right? You ever read that about David's mighty men? Sometimes there's only one verse mentioned about these mighty men, but what they were able to accomplish was just ridiculous when it comes to warfare. You think about our Navy SEALs today. You think about the elite of the elite. And you think, wow, it would take an entire platoon to go in, or we can send in 12 to 24 Navy SEALs. And I wonder what would cause more damage. Well, in the back of my mind, I'm sitting here going, well, the Navy SEALs have the extra training. They've got to have superior physique and mental stability. They know the weapons. They know the warfare. They know the tactics. And all this in the back of my mind, I'm going, wait a second, Israel had champions too. If David had mighty men, are we to assume Saul only had a bunch of weaklings around him? And in my mind, I sit here and I think, that's not what this is about. It's not about that Israel having champions. It's about Goliath is painted in such a way that no man should have ever defeated him. And so the response within the camp was this: fear, dismay, running away. And David had brothers in that army. And so when David shows up on the scene bringing the provisions that his father Jesse wanted him to bring, it's almost like David was insulting the older brothers, right? You ever met somebody who was afraid? You ever seen somebody who was afraid? And you ever gone, especially teenage boys. I love it with teenage boys. The older they get, it seems like they understand, hey man, I'm afraid, But especially like junior high, early high school, right? You walk around the corner and go, boo, and you see them go, boo. You're like, you were afraid. Nuh-uh, man. Nuh-uh. I'm not afraid. You ever called somebody a coward or called out that they were afraid and seen them start to posture? I'm not afraid. Well, David's brothers didn't respond very well to David. You only showed up, you're just here, you need to be back in the field with the father's flock. What are you doing here? David's like, I'm just asking a question. Why are y'all sitting back, letting this uncircumcised Philistine call out our God? Why are you doing nothing? You're just a troublemaker. You need to go home. It was just a question. All I'm doing is asking a question. What will be done for the man who answers the call? What will be done for the one who stands up to the one who is mocking God? Well, Saul will reward him greatly with wealth and also the marriage of the daughter. David says, I'll go. Now, David was a young fellow. He was a young fellow, according to the ranks of that time. Some would question whether he was even able to serve or not in a full capacity of the military, but whatever the reason, he stayed home. And what we do know is this, that when he steps up and says, I'll do it, there's some questions. And David immediately responds to God's faithfulness in the past. And say, God's been there for me. He's allowed me to do these great events and to see me through these turmoil times. Saul says, okay. You can almost, I hate to say, you almost look at Saul and you say, he had nobody else. I'm not sure that was the case. As far as why Saul made the decision that he did, David made a pretty compelling case that God had been on his side. My problem is, why didn't Saul realize that God had been on the side of the Israelites? Why didn't Saul remember that he parted the Red Sea? Why didn't Saul remember that he gave manna from above? Why didn't Saul remember all the great accounts about the Exodus out of Egypt? Why is it that now, in this valley, Goliath is able to say these horrible things, and God's people aren't standing up? And so David comes on the scene. He says, I'll go. Saul says, here's my armor, here's my sword. David says, I've not practiced with these. I'll go with what I know. And so David took into the battlefield. Does anybody remember what he took? A sling and how many smooth stones, young people? 5. That's exactly right. Have you ever wondered why 5 stones? David was a man of faith. He had already said he was going to go out to the field. Why didn't he just pick up 1?
Brothers.
Indication from some scholarship is that it was his brothers. Now, I'll say this, I want to be fair to that. There's some question, but it's my conclusion that it was his brothers as well. In other words, Goliath wasn't the only big boy on the side of the Philistines. And so when David comes into the field and he slings the stone and he throws it, in his mind he says, Goliath is going down. And when Goliath goes down, I'm going to reload for when his brothers come out after me. Goliath was pretty bold, or David was pretty bold. Saying, look, I'm here. I'm standing toe-to-toe. Well, what's great is when he comes out, Goliath laughs, saying, why don't you come out with me as a dog? I'm a professional soldier. You're coming out as a child. And I think it's great because over in verse 45, David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you up into my hands. You say, Joe, why do you start with David and Goliath? I start with David and Goliath because I want to drive home a point. And that point is this. The culture within the army of the Israelites in that particular time was one of fear, was one of being dismayed, was one of desiring to run and hide. I don't know why God's people at that time had decided that God could not take care of Goliath. But when David walks onto the scene, you notice something about him. You notice that he was not afraid to say, this isn't right. He wasn't afraid to say, this can't continue. And he wasn't afraid to put his own life on the line and say, God's going to defeat you. But he had to walk. David had to pick up the stones. He had to sling the sling. God wasn't going to sling the sling for him. David had to enter the battlefield. You see, and you look at that and you say, well, if God was going to take care of him, anybody would have entered the battlefield on that front. Really? What if I were to tell you this? God's going to take care of you next time an atheist challenges you. God's going to take care of you next time your teacher says, who's a Christian, knowing that a rebuke will be coming your way. What if I were to tell you this? God's going to take care of you next time you break up with that guy or you break up with that girl because they're wanting to do something that's immoral. All of a sudden then you start going, God's going to take care of you if you quit the football team because of the culture in the locker room. God's going to take care of you when you say, I can no longer hang out with those buddies of mine, those girlfriends of mine, because of their dress or their language or their lifestyle. God's going to take care of you. And all of a sudden you go, I know God's going to take care of me, but do you understand how I'll be isolated? Do you understand the difficulties I will face at school? Do you understand how much ridicule I will receive? And all the while, we're saying, yeah, anybody would go into the field if they knew God was going to take care of them. Really? Really? I would propose this to you. David wasn't a man who just talked about faith in God. He was a man who walked with faith in God. And that's a different concept. David didn't just take the Bible quizzes. David took the life challenges. You and I think about this concept of rising against culture, doing the things that not everybody does for the sake of God. I want you to start off thinking about a concept with me. You see a picture of an elephant in this picture, and what you can't see, just by nature of the image, is his back right leg, the back right leg of that elephant. You see how it's up off the ground? What you can't see real well is that it's got a shackle down there near the bottom joint of that foot. And I show you this image because we look at elephants today as probably some of the biggest land animals that we know of. You talk about weight, you talk about power. I don't want to be in the way of an elephant. I don't want to be in the way of a rhinoceros when they start running my way. Quite honestly, I really don't want to be in the way of any animal when it starts running towards me. Some house cats even scare me. Right? Because I'm not real sure what they're going to do. And I grew up in a house of house cats. That's why I can tell you that. But you think about cultures in America today and how they utilize beasts of the ground to do their work. They're called beasts of burden. You and I today would think, what's our beast of burden? Well, I know in the Amish farms that we visited, to see a mule hooked up to a wagon or hooked up to a plow was no surprise. When I drive back and forth between Alabama and Tennessee, we go through what's called Amish country, and I see Amish buggies on the side of the road all the time, and their horses are pulling their loads. You think about oxen, you think about cattle. That's our concept of beast of burden. But how many of y'all have ever seen the show Dumbo? Anybody ever seen the show Dumbo? You remember when they were putting up the big tent? And you remember those elephants grabbing the hammers with their trunks and nailing it? Now, I really would love to see how a circus gets put up. I'm going to guess the elephants don't grab the hammers, though, right? But you understand some cultures use big animals to do hard work. And in other countries, they actually train elephants to do their work, to lift the heavy loads. But here's the way they do that. They start when the elephant is really young, and they tie a chain, or they shackle a chain to the leg of the elephant, and they tie the other side of that chain to an immovable object of some sort. You look at that and you say, well, why would anybody do that? Well, they know the elephant's not going to be used to having the shackle around their leg, and so they're going to immediately try to get away. And they're going to try to pull, and they're going to try to snort, and they're going to try to do everything that an elephant does to try to get away. But eventually they're going to come to the conclusion, I can't get away. And then what happens is, as the elephant grows and continues to put on weight, continues to put on muscle, you would think, oh, the heavier, the stronger the animal, the heavier and stronger the chain. But what they actually do is, as the animal grows, they decrease the chain strength, and they decrease the strength of the immovable object. To the point when the elephant is fully trained, there are some studies and some cultures that will say they can tie a piece of twine around the back leg of the elephant, tie the other piece of twine to a stick, hammer the stick in the ground, and when they go to sleep out in the woods, wherever they're working, they wake up the next morning and guess what's still there? The elephant. And you and I look at that and say, why didn't the elephant run away? Why didn't the elephant, an animal that knows it has the power, why didn't it run away? And the answer is because it has a piece of twine around it. And you look at that and you say, that doesn't make sense, Joe. Let me ask you a question. Was it the piece of twine that kept the animal there? So here like this. That animal could have broken loose from that piece of twine any day. The problem was the elephant had been convinced that it couldn't break away. When you and I start talking about raise the bar, understanding and reaching God's expectations, I'll go ahead and land the plane for you early. Our culture has not done young people any favors when it comes to reaching God's expectations, because we've become a culture of excuses. We've become a culture of redefining the norm for young people. How many of you have ever heard, well, they're just young, they're sowing their wild oats? That is a philosophy geared towards young people. Or have you ever heard the idea where they're just adolescents? And what we're doing is we're making an excuse. What I want to do is I want to take you on a journey with me. And some of you may have seen some of this before. You may have heard of these individuals. But if you haven't, it'll be interesting to hear. David Farragut, he was the United States' first Rear Admiral of our Navy. David Farragut, you would think, well, when he grew up, it was a different time. But I want to tell you a little bit about David Farragut's background. You see, David Farragut began working on warships when he was very young, somewhere between the age of 12 and 14. By the time he reached somewhere between 14 and 16, it has been said before that he was able to rise in the ranks where he actually had soldiers under his command. I want you to think about that for 1 minute. What 16-year-old do you know of in America, generally speaking, is ready to have soldiers under his command? When he says go, when he says charge, when he says take this prisoner that way, and they respond. David Farragut continued to rise in the ranks to when he became in his early 20s, he actually was a commander. And when he rose early or later on, somewhere in his 30s, he became a high-ranking official. And you'd say, well, he was in his 30s. Surely that just happens. Well, no, it doesn't just happen. Ask individuals in our military today, usually by the age of 30, you're not to the rank that David Farragut was. You say, well, Joe, that was a different time. Back then, kids just did things differently. And I would say, you're right. That was a different time with a different expectation. Many of you know who this individual is. The man who's on the front of a dollar bill. And if I had one, I would hold it up and show you. But I have 4 children, so I carry no cash. It's dangerous. But many of you do not know that before George Washington was the first president of the United States, that he was a land surveyor for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And while he was in his late teens, he was commissioned to travel the unexplored territory, to mark it, to report back to the government of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And he even, as he was earlier in his 20s, he actually became a foreman and oversaw the building of certain Commonwealth of Virginia's owned property, such as a prison. And you look at that and you say, what? A man that young was given such great responsibility? And the answer is absolutely he was. You say that was a different time in America, and I would say you're absolutely right. You see, there was a time in America, even before the late 1800s, where you fell into one of three categories. You were either considered to be a child, you were considered to be an adult, or you were considered to be a man of old age. Right? Now, here's what's beautiful. If I were to say, what's the age today where a person transitions from a child to an adult, what would you say? And don't overthink it. What would you say?
18.
It's 18, which is funny because at 18 you can't even rent a car. Can't even rent a car at the age of 18. I love the arguments of young people. Well, I can serve in the military. Surely I can make my own decisions. Yeah, go ahead. Go up to the car rental desk and see if they will rent you a car by that excuse. Because they won't. I love this one too. I'm 18. I can serve in the military. Surely I can stay out till 11. Man, Dad, you're just making all these rules. Yeah, and you're still living in my house off of my dime, Mr. 18-year-old. Get out of my house. You want to be an adult? Get out of my house. I was just kidding. I bet you were. You say, you're pretty mean. I really do like kids. Most of them, like when they're his age. No, I do. I love kids, but I have fun doing what I do. So anyhow, the idea is this. We have ages today that serve as a transition between these life stages. At that time, they didn't have ages that served as a transition. If I were to ask you today, what's the transition between the adult and the old age, what would you probably say? Adolescence. Feels that way, right?
50.
Somebody says 15, what'd you say? 55. I was waiting on retirement, but either way, you just helped me because I'm not at 50 or 55 yet. And what you're telling me is that just in a few years I'm going to feel very old. That's what you just told me. Okay? I was hoping you would say retirement. And we look at retirement and we say, well, that's when we transition from the workforce into now you get to do what you want to do and, sleep in. The only problem is by that age, you're already used to getting up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and so it's hard to sleep in, right? And so we have these age breakdowns. Back then, it had everything to do with what did your family need and what were your abilities. Because there was no retirement in that time period. Can you imagine a man at that time period working until he's 62 or 65, one day waking up, looking at his wife and saying, I'm no longer going to work the farm. I'm just going to retire. I don't think so. Because somebody's got to feed them. Right? Because there was none of this, well, the government will send you money at the age of 65. Or how about this, an individual who says, I can't work, I'm in high school. Most of the young people didn't go to high school back then. If you were the age of 15 and you were able to work, you may have gotten all the education you were going to get in a schoolroom, and you may be out in the field working with your father right beside him. You may be at home working with your mother right beside her. You see, it wasn't about what age you were. It was about what was your family's needs. And it was about what was your ability. People transitioned to old age when they could no longer physically work. And then what happened was there was no welfare concept or let me get Medicare, Medicaid. It was your family was your retirement plan. And if it wasn't the family, oftentimes it would have been the church. Those were your retirement plans. And so what I would tell you this is that was a different time, but that was up until the late 1800s. So let me show you this right here, because this may really shock you then when I start talking about how new our current concept of teenage culture really is. You see, in the 1900 census, it was reported that one child in every 5 between the ages of 10 and 15 were employed in full-time work. You say, let me see, that was the year 1900, we're in 2017, 117 years ago. In our country, up until the 1900s, you see here that 1 out of every 5 children between the ages of 10 and 15 were employed as a full-time laborer. Oftentimes, they were working jobs that required small hands, small people to get into certain areas, right? And so they would do the jobs and they would work right alongside of adults. You think, well, no. Kids need to grow up around kids. I'm about to say something that you're not necessarily going to like. That is a modern day philosophy of child rearing. No. You don't understand. I want my kids to have good friends. I want my kids to have good friends too. But if I'm going to be real with history, I've got to be real with history. History in America was 1 out of every 5 children were working full-time jobs. And they were spending more time around adults than they were their own peer groups. And what we see is that there were some people that didn't like that and thought it needed to change. And so around 1916, there was discussion amongst Congress that maybe we should impose some laws regulating how often we work children. But at that particular point in time in the nation's history, they said, no, it's not time to do that. Well, what eventually happened was there was a particular president that stuck around for quite some time, and in one of his re-election campaign bids, he went on a tour, and he happened to go on a particular tour and saw some young ladies that were working in a sewing factory. And while he was going through the sewing factory, the story is told that one of the girls slipped a note in the pocket of President Roosevelt. Roosevelt would read this letter, and this happens to be an excerpt from that letter where it says, I wish you could do something to help us girls. We've been working in a sewing factory, and up to a few months ago, we were getting our minimum pay of $11 a week. Today, the 200 of us girls have been cut down to $4, $5, and $6 a week. And we have people crying because they're not being paid enough to flip a burger at McDonald's. I mean, think about this. You say, Joe, that was a different time. You could get a soda